On the Saturday morning of Labor Day weekend, I woke up in my mother's house to a silence so complete I could hear the refrigerator hum, because my family had left the state without me. For 2 weeks, they all told me the same thing: don't make any plans. They whispered in the kitchen and went quiet when I walked in. Just wait, my mom smiled. So I waited. I slept in my childhood bedroom because she asked me to stay. I woke up alone, to an empty driveway, and a note on the counter about my grandmother's medication. By noon, I was staring at my sister's Instagram story. A dock, a lake, my whole family laughing, and a caption I will remember for the rest of my life. Best trip ever. When she's not around. LOL. I didn't react. I didn't comment. I didn't text. I just waited. Because there was one thing about that lake cottage that none of them knew. 2 days later, my phone lit up with 63 missed calls and one message from my mom. Please come home. We didn't know. If stories about family, boundaries, and long overdue justice speak to you, drop a comment below and be sure to subscribe. Let me back up, because you need to know who was left standing in that empty kitchen. I run a small bookkeeping firm on Main Street in Crestwood, Ohio. 3 part-time employees, 41 clients, and a coffee maker older than my career. I built it myself after community college, one tax season at a time. I live alone in a tidy apartment 10 minutes from the house I grew up in. I write in pencil, because ink is for things that are final. People trust me with their money because I am calm, I am exact, and I do not flinch at a bad number. 6 years ago, my dad died of a heart attack in the parking lot of the hardware store, 57 years old, holding a bag of deck screws. He was the axle of our family. When an axle breaks, somebody has to crawl under the wagon and hold it up. That somebody was me. I became the one who kept things running. My grandmother Ruth's medication schedule lived in my phone. My mom's furnace guy had my number, not hers. Every tax return in the family crossed my desk in April, free of charge. And on a shelf in my office, between client files, sat a green 3-ring binder that nobody in my family had ever seen. I added to it quietly, year after year, the way you tend a grave. 6 years of my life lived inside that binder. My family didn't know it existed. By the end of this story, every one of them would know exactly what was in it, and it would cost more than one of them could stand to pay. But that September, it just sat on the shelf, fat and patient, waiting for someone to finally ask the right question. You'd have liked my family if you only saw them from the street. My mom, Carol, 61, could make a folding table look like a magazine spread. She ran every holiday like a stage director. Who sat where? Who carried what? Whose news got announced when? My sister Brooke is 37, works part-time at the bank, married to Josh, a warehouse manager with a good laugh. Their daughter Ava is 12, all elbows and questions, and the only person at those dinners who ever asked how my week was. My brother Dean is 29, sells gym equipment, and has been one investor away from opening his own fitness franchise since he was 25. Every Sunday, we ate pot roast at Mom's, and every Sunday, there was a moment when something needed doing: a form, a bill, a phone call to an insurance company. And the room would say the same sentence, in the same easy voice: Faith will handle it. Nobody ever asked if Faith wanted to handle it. You don't ask the dishwasher if it feels like running. I fixed Aunt Patty's register at the craft fair. I did Dean's taxes, Brooke's taxes, Josh's side job taxes, and last fall, for the first time in my life, I said no to something. Dean wanted me to co-sign a loan for a new truck he could not afford. I offered to help him budget for a used one instead. He looked at me like I'd slapped him. The frost at Sunday dinner lasted 3 weeks. My mother's special weather, where nobody is angry and the gravy is passed to you last, every time, until you learn. I thought that frost had thawed by summer. I was wrong about what it had turned into. The whispering started 2 weeks before Labor Day. My mom called me on a Tuesday while I was closing out a client's payroll. "Don't make any plans, sweetheart," she said, and I could hear the smile through the phone. "Not for Labor Day weekend, promise me." I asked what was happening. "Just wait," she said. That Sunday at dinner, the whole house had a secret in it. Brooke and Mom went quiet in the kitchen when I came in for the salad bowl, the way a radio cuts out under a bridge. Dean grinned at his plate like a kid holding a firecracker. At one point, Ava bounced up to me and said, "Aunt Faith, did you know that we're—" And Brooke's hand landed on her shoulder and steered her toward the dessert table so fast the child's ponytail swung. I told myself it was a surprise. For me, I know how that sounds now, but you have to understand what those 2 weeks felt like from the inside. I have spent 6 years being the person who plans things for other people. Nobody had planned anything for me since my 28th birthday, when my dad grilled burgers in the rain and made everyone stand under the awning and sing. So when my family started whispering and smiling and telling me to keep my calendar empty, some closed-up room in my chest opened a window. Maybe a party. Maybe a trip. Maybe just a cake and my name on it. I audit other people's stories for a living. I can find the hole in a budget from across the room. But even a bookkeeper can misread a number when she wants the total to be true. I want to be clear about something, because it matters later. I did not walk into this blind. I asked. Twice. The first time, I asked Mom straight out if the family was doing the cottage for Labor Day, because if so, I needed to shuffle 2 client deadlines and book the time off from my own business. She looked me in the eye and said, "Stay in town, honey. Trust me. You'll want to be here." The second time, a week out, I asked Brooke if I should prep anything, coolers, groceries, the usual. She said, "Nope, all handled. Just keep your weekend free." So I did what a careful person does. I moved my quarterly review with my biggest client to the following week. I gave up my seat at a bookkeepers conference in Columbus I'd been looking forward to since spring. Non-refundable, by the way. I checked the family group chat for logistics, because I'm always the logistics. Nothing. Quiet as a closed bank. And here's the part that stings to say out loud. This past January, I had tried to fix this family with a spreadsheet. I printed a simple cost-sharing plan, who could chip in what for the family's expenses, everything above board, and set it on Mom's table. My mother cried like I'd read her diary in church. Brooke said, and I quote, "You're turning family into an invoice." Dean called me a cash register with a ponytail. So I folded my one page back into my purse, and I kept paying for everything myself, quietly, the way I had for 6 years. They called me a cash register in January. By September, I'd find out what they really thought I was. The Friday before Labor Day, Mom invited me for dinner and asked me to sleep over. "Stay in your old room," she said. "Big day tomorrow. Just wait." She made pot roast on a Friday, which should have set off every alarm I own. The house felt warm in a rehearsed way, like a stage set 10 minutes before curtain. Dean kept checking his phone and smiling. Brooke and Josh came by for dessert, and twice I walked into a conversation that stopped so hard I could feel the period at the end of it. I caught a glimpse of a suitcase behind the laundry room door, navy blue, wheels out, ready. And my chest did that stupid warm thing again. Luggage. A surprise trip then. Maybe they'd finally planned something and my only job was to show up and be celebrated. I remember deciding, standing in that hallway with a dish towel in my hand, that I would let them have the joy of surprising me, that I wouldn't peek, wouldn't guess, wouldn't do the math out loud. When Brooke's family left, Ava hugged me at the door longer than usual, her face pressed into my ribs, and she said, "Bye, Aunt Faith," in a small voice that I misread as sleepiness. It wasn't sleepiness. My mom kissed my forehead at the top of the stairs, first time in years, and said it one more time, softer than before. "Don't make any plans." I brushed my teeth in the sink I'd used as a teenager and fell asleep in my childhood bed, listening to my family whisper through the wall, warm as a fool in winter. I slept well. That's the part I still can't forgive myself for. I woke at 7:40 to a house with no sounds in it, no coffee maker gurgling, no shower running, no Dean feet on the stairs, just the refrigerator, humming to itself like it was trying to keep me company. I lay there a full minute, telling myself they were hiding, that I'd walk down and the lights would flip on and there'd be balloons. I walked down. The kitchen was clean and cold. The driveway through the window was empty. Both cars gone. And on the counter, under the good salt shaker, sat a single sheet of paper in my mother's round, cheerful handwriting. Ruth's pills. Blue one with breakfast, white ones at night. List on the fridge. Trash goes out Tuesday. Water my tomatoes. They're fussy. Back Monday evening. Thanks, sweetie. No sorry. No explanation. No cottage. No destination. No, we'll miss you. Not even my name. Just sweetie. The word you use for a waitress or a dog. I stood there in my pajamas holding the note, and the room did a slow, quiet tilt, because I finally saw the shape of it. Don't make any plans. Not because something was planned for me, because I was the plan. I was the house sitter, the pill counter, the tomato waterer. The staff doesn't get a warning when the family goes on vacation. The staff gets a list. I called my mom once, straight to voicemail, her chipper greeting from 10 years ago. I set the phone down on the counter next to the note and made myself a cup of coffee in that spotless kitchen, and I drank it slowly, standing up, while somewhere north of me my family was laughing on a highway. By noon, I found out where they were, the way you find out most things now, from a screen. It was Brooke's Instagram story. I wasn't even looking for it. The app served it to me like a subpoena. First frame, a wooden dock over blue-gray water, Dean mid-cannonball, all knees and glory. Second frame, my mother in her white sun hat, raising a plastic cup of something pink toward the camera, laughing with her whole face, a laugh I hadn't seen since Dad was alive. Third frame, Josh at a grill, Ava on a paddleboard, sunlight everywhere. I knew that dock. I knew that water. Lake Arden. Our cottage. My father's cottage. 2 hours north, the place I had not been invited to. And across the bottom of the last frame, in that cursive font Brooke uses for happy announcements, sat the caption, "Best trip ever. When she's not around, LOL." 214 people had watched it by noon. Aunt Patty had responded with a little red heart. I stood in my mother's kitchen and read it 4 times, the way you re-add a column that keeps landing on a number you don't want. She. Not around. Lowell. I waited to feel the scream build, and it didn't come. What came instead was worse, or maybe better. A stillness, cold and wide, like a lake icing over in a single night. I did not comment. I did not post. I did not text a soul. I put the phone face down on the counter, washed my coffee cup, dried it, and set it in the rack. Then I picked up Mom's watering can, filled it, walked to the tomatoes, and stopped with the can in midair. I looked at those fussy little plants for a long moment. I set the can down, still full, on the porch rail. Every machine has an off switch. Mine had just been found. And here's what my family forgot when they left the state. They'd left me home alone with every device, every calendar, every account in this family that I had ever been asked to manage. Here is what I did not do that Saturday. I did not call Brooke and demand an explanation. I did not type the 11 furious paragraphs my thumbs were begging to type. I did not cry into the pot roast leftovers. Rage is a payday loan, feels like money, costs you double by Tuesday. I locked my mother's house, drove the 10 minutes to my apartment, showered, put on real clothes, and then did the one thing on that note worth doing. I picked up my grandmother's pills and drove to Ruth's little brick house on Cedar Street. Because here's who else woke up that morning without a family. An 83-year-old woman with a bad hip and a sharper mind than all of us combined. They'd left her behind too. Too much trouble, apparently. Ruth opened the door in her good cardigan, looked at my face for exactly 1 second, and said, "Well, you'd better come in and crack some eggs." So the 2 people who got scratched off the guest list ate scrambled eggs and toast at her kitchen table, off the plates with the blue windmills, and neither of us said the word cottage for a full hour. There was a kind of peace in it, sitting with the only person in my family who had never once handed me a list. If you've ever been the one holding everything together, and somehow the last one anyone thinks to invite, tell me in the comments where you're watching from tonight. I read every one of them. And if this story already sounds familiar, go ahead and subscribe, because what I found on my grandmother's iPad 2 hours later My family still doesn't know I saw, and it changed everything about what happened next. My grandmother Ruth taught third grade for 31 years, which means she can smell a lie before it finishes getting dressed. She poured me more coffee and told me what she knew, which was almost nothing, and that was the point. They'd told her about the trip on Thursday. Thursday. An adult's getaway, Ruthie, you'd hate the stairs, is what my mother said to her. To a woman who still does her own gutters against everyone's direct orders. Ruth stirred her coffee and delivered the line I've thought about every day since. They took the boat keys, she said. Funny. Nobody ever asks who keeps the lights on. I looked up. She looked back, steady as a level. She didn't know the details. She has never seen my green binder. But grandmothers do arithmetic in their own currency. She'd watched me show up with a toolbox in February and a checkbook in April for 6 years. She'd drawn her own conclusions and filed them away, the way teachers do, waiting for the student to be ready. Then she said something stranger. Your father did one smart thing about that cottage before he died. She held her mug with both hands. Ask me about it when you're ready. I said I was ready now. She shook her head. No, honey, you're angry now. Ready is different. Ready comes after you know what they're actually doing up there. I told her they were swimming and drinking pink things out of plastic cups. Ruth looked out her kitchen window toward the north, the direction of the lake, for a long, quiet moment, then said the second thing I've never forgotten. Your mother came by Thursday with casseroles and her good church folder on the car seat, honey. Nobody packs paperwork for a swim. I didn't know what she meant yet. Her iPad was about to tell me. The iPad was my fault, in the way everything in this family was eventually my job, and therefore, my fault. 3 years ago, when Ruth's doctor moved her checkups to video calls, the family decided, say it with me, Faith will handle it. So I set up an iPad for her using an old Apple ID of Brooke's, because Brooke had an unused account and nobody wanted to pay for new storage. Brooke never logged out. I maintain the thing every month like a good little IT department. Updates, storage, charging cable by the recliner. That Saturday afternoon, I picked it up off Ruth's end table to clear her cluttered screen before her Monday appointment. And there it was on the lock screen. Patient as a paper cut. A shared calendar notification. Gary Sutton. Cottage. Mon 11 o'clock a.m. I stood very still. Everybody in Crestwood knows Gary Sutton. His face smiles down at you from the biggest realtor billboard on Route 9, right next to the words, Your Home. His promise. My thumb hovered over the screen while my brain did what it is trained to do, reconcile the accounts. A realtor. At our cottage. On Labor Day Monday. At 11 in the morning. With my entire family gathered in one place, coolers packed, kids entertained, grandmother parked, and the one person who reads every document in this family conveniently left 2 hours south watering tomatoes. Numbers don't lie, but they'll sit quietly while you lie to yourself. I'd spent 2 weeks believing the whispers were a party. The lock screen fixed that. My family didn't take a vacation, they took a meeting. And whatever that meeting was about, they had needed me. Specifically, surgically, me. Not to be in the room for it. I want to be honest about the next part because I've gone over the ethics of it at 2 in the morning more than once. I opened the Messages app on that iPad. It was a device I administered, signed into an account its owner had abandoned, syncing conversations nobody had bothered to silence. But yes, I opened it, with cold hands and Ruth pretending very hard to watch her bird feeder. At the top of the list sat a group chat I had never been in. Cottage crew, with a little boat emoji, created the 3rd week of May. While I was doing their taxes amended returns, I scrolled up through 3 months of my family planning a weekend without me the way other people plan weddings. Who'd bring the kayaks? Whether Josh's brother could lend a second grill. Mom asking Brooke to pick the week Faith usually does quarterly filings, so she won't push to come up. And then, from the 2nd week of June, the message that rearranged something in my chest permanently. Ava, sweet, loyal Ava, texting from Brooke's phone, had asked, Is Aunt Faith coming? She loves the lake. And my mother's reply, time-stamped 9:41 on a Tuesday morning, sitting there in a gray bubble like it was nothing. Not this one, honey. She'll do the math out loud. That was it. That was my crime, stated plainly by my own mother in writing. Not that I was cruel or boring or difficult. That I would do the math. Out loud. In front of everyone. I read it maybe 10 times, and somewhere around the 6th, the hurt did a strange thing. It turned professional. All right, Mom, I remember thinking, with a calm that frightened me a little. What math were you so afraid I'd do? I kept scrolling. And then I found the spreadsheet. Pinned to the top of Cottage Crew, above the kayak logistics and the sunscreen reminders, sat an attachment. Terrell Family Budget version 3. I built that file. 2 winters ago, at my mother's kitchen table, I made her a clean little template with tabs and formulas so she could track her spending without calling me every Sunday. She'd hugged me and called me her clever girl. And now here it was, my own handiwork, repurposed to budget the family weekend I'd been deleted from. Gas money split 4 ways, grocery list, a line item that said GS Lunch, Carol. GS Gary Sutton. They were buying the realtor a sandwich with my spreadsheet. But the file was just the appetizer. The chat spelled out the rest in cheerful little bubbles. Sunday night, after the kids went to bed. Family meeting. Everyone on the same page before Gary comes. Monday at 11. Gary Sutton walks the property. The words, listing price, appeared. The words, before the fall market cools, appeared. Dean, in July. Deposit deadline is the Friday after Labor Day. Franchise rep confirmed, 60 grand holds my territory. My mother, in August. The cottage does nothing but cost money. Your father would want it working for this family. And then, from Mom, the last brick in the wall, posted 10 days before they left. Don't tell Faith till it's done. You know how she gets. You know how she gets. I sat in my grandmother's recliner with that iPad warm on my knees and understood the whole architecture at once, the way a column of numbers suddenly foots. They weren't just spending a weekend without me. They were voting on my father's cottage, selling the last thing he ever built with his hands. And I wasn't on the ballot. I was on the chore list. I drove back to my apartment as the light went long and gold, and I didn't turn on the television, and I didn't pour a glass of wine. I went to the shelf in my home office between 2 client boxes, and I took down the green binder. I set it on my kitchen table the way you'd set down something breakable, and I opened it to the first page, and for the first time in 6 years I read it start to finish as a stranger would. Property taxes on the Lake Arden cottage, $3,900 a year, 6 years running. Paid by me. Receipts filed by quarter. Homeowners insurance, $1,650 a year. Autopay from my business account. My name on every statement. The September the septic system failed. $7,200, and me on the phone with the contractor at 6 in the morning between client calls. The roof after the ice storm. 4,800. The dock Dean cannonballs off of, 2,300 to rebuild the pilings. The furnace, 3,100. Winterizing, plowing the lane, the plumber, the chimney man. Another 10,700, nickel by nickel, autumn by autumn. At the bottom of the last page in my own pencil sat the total I had never once said out loud. $61,400. The cottage does nothing but cost money, my mother had written. She was almost right. It cost money. It just never cost her any. I sat there with my palm flat on those pages, and I heard her voice from 2 weeks of phone calls, sweet as pie filling. Don't make any plans. I looked at 6 years of my quiet, invisible, unthanked competence lying open on a kitchen table, and I made one. But a plan needs its paperwork, and mine was missing one document. So the next morning, I went back to my grandmother. Sunday morning, Ruth had coffee waiting because grandmothers keep their own calendars. I sat down and said, "I'm ready now." And she nodded like I'd finally turned in my homework and told me about the smart thing. 8 years ago, 2 years before he died, my dad had a warning. Chest pains on a ladder, an ambulance, a stent, and a week of lying in a hospital bed doing what men like him never do, thinking about after. When he came home, he refinanced the cottage to fix the foundation, and on a gray Thursday that October, he drove to the title office in Harlan Falls and had the deed redone. Joint ownership. His name and mine. Ruth went with him. She signed the visitor log. She remembers he wore his funeral tie because it was the only one ironed. He said the cottage should belong to someone who shows up, she told me, hands around her mug. He said, and I'm quoting your father now, someone who shows up should hold the keys. I knew, of course. I'd signed the papers myself at 26, half listening, embarrassed by the fuss, assuming it was estate housekeeping that would matter someday in some distant gray-haired future. He meant to tell the family when the moment was right. 22 months later, he was gone in a parking lot. And there'd been no moment, and I had folded my ownership away with my grief and never once said it out loud. Because saying it while Mom wept over his recliner would have looked like a land grab, and I was too busy becoming the family's load-bearing wall to read my own blueprints. So here is where my story stood that Sunday morning. My family was 2 hours north, planning to vote on a cottage they didn't fully own. I stood up to leave with my whole spine full of purpose, and Ruth said, "Sit down. There's a second half." So I sat, and my grandmother told me about my mother, the part of her story that never gets told at Sunday dinner. Carol was 23 when her own mother's health failed. There were 3 sisters, and 2 of them had the good sense to live far away. So for 7 years, 7, my mother spooned soup, changed sheets, managed pills, and missed the decade where a life gets built. Her sisters sent Christmas cards from Florida with beach photos and glitter. Nobody paid her. Nobody asked her. The one time she raised the subject of help, her mother reportedly stared at her and said she didn't know daughters had started charging. Her mother thought that's what daughters were for too, Ruth said, and let that sentence sit between us on the tablecloth like a stone she'd been carrying in her apron for 40 years. I asked why she was telling me this. Was I supposed to forgive it? Ruth snorted. Forgiveness is your business. I'm just showing you the river. She leaned forward. Your mother drowned in this exact water, honey, and instead of draining it, she taught her own daughter to swim laps in it and called it love. That's the oldest recipe in the world. Then she patted my hand once, briskly, teacher to student, and added, knowing where the river starts doesn't keep you dry. I drove home the long way, past the hardware store where my father died, and I'll tell you the truth about what all that history did to me. Understanding my mother didn't change my next move by a single inch. It only made my hand steadier when I made it. Sunday night. My kitchen table. The binder closed at my left elbow, a mug of tea going cold at my right, and my laptop open in the middle like an altar. 2 hours north, if the group chat's agenda held, my family was putting the kids to bed early and gathering on the screen porch for their family meeting. Everyone on the same page before Gary comes. Every phone in that cottage had my number in it. Any one of them could have called me at any moment in the last 3 months. I checked, out of professional habit. My last text from my mother was 11 days old. It said, "Don't forget, Ruth has a dentist appointment." So, no, I did not text my family. I have never once texted them about any of this. And I never will. And if that sounds cold to you, I understand. But read the note on that counter again, and tell me which of us went cold first. Instead, at 12 minutes past 9, I wrote an email to the office of Gary Sutton Realty. It was 3 lines long, and I have written grocery lists with more emotion. Line 1. I am a joint owner of record of the property at 14 Arden Shore Lane, parcel number attached. Line 2. The property is not for sale, and no listing agreement will be signed by me. Line 3. I'd suggest his office verify the title before Monday's 11 o'clock appointment, and I thanked him for his time, because manners are free. I copied myself. I hit send at 9:12 p.m. and the whoosh sound was the loudest thing that had happened in my apartment all weekend. The invisible daughter died right there, at a clean kitchen table, between one email and a cup of cold tea. I rinsed the mug. I went to bed. And I slept like a ledger that finally balanced. Labor Day morning, I did something radical. I lived my own life. I picked up Ruth at 8:30 and we went to the farmer's market on the square, where she haggled over late summer peaches like it was a contact sport and introduced me to three separate women as my granddaughter, the one with the business. We bought too much corn. We got coffee from the truck with the striped awning and sat on the bench outside the library, and my grandmother, who knew exactly what I'd sent at 9:12 the night before because I'd told her over the peaches, never once asked me if I was sure. That's what being believed in feels like, if you've forgotten. Meanwhile, 2 hours north, I could see the morning as clearly as if I'd catered it. Mom would be wiping down the counters her guests never noticed, setting out the lemon bars she makes for company, angling the good chairs toward the water. Dean would be pacing the dock in his lucky polo, rehearsing franchise numbers he'd never once run past the family bookkeeper. Brooke would be arranging the porch for maximum listing photo potential, and a man with a billboard smile would be loading a folder into his car, whistling, with no idea that an email was sitting in his office inbox like a mousetrap in a bread box. At 10:58, on that library bench, I checked the time, turned my ringer off, and set my phone face down on my knee. Ruth watched me do it and bit into a peach. At 11:04, the screen lit up for the first time. I watched it glow through the back of the case, patient as a lighthouse. I didn't touch it. Here is the anatomy of a family emergency, as observed from a library bench in the sunshine. 11:04. Mom. 11:06. Mom. 11:10. Dean. Then Dean. Then Dean again. 3 times in 4 minutes. Like a man kicking a vending machine. 11:20. Brooke. 11:21. A voicemail. 11:40. Josh. Josh, who has never called me in his life. A man so allergic to the phone he texts thumbs up to voicemails. By noon, the screen looked like a slot machine that wouldn't stop paying out. I drove Ruth home. I made her lunch. I fixed the sticky hinge on her screen door, because Labor Day is for labor. The only messages I opened all afternoon were from the one number I'll always answer. Ava, texting from her mother's phone in the way of 12-year-olds. No capital letters, no context, pure signal. Aunt Faith, why is everyone yelling? Then, 20 minutes later, the realtor guy left after like 10 minutes. He didn't even get to the dock. Then, Grandma keeps saying a number and putting her hand over her mouth. Then, at 4:30, the one that told me the whole story. Mom deleted her story. Not posted an apology. Not called me on speaker to say we're so sorry. Come up. We'll wait. Deleted the evidence. I put the phone on the charger in my kitchen at 9 and watched a documentary about lighthouses. By midnight, the counter on my missed calls read 63 from 5 different numbers, and not one voicemail among them had yet said the only word that mattered. Somewhere around hour 2, they'd learned who owned the cottage. From what I could piece together, it took them until dark to work out who'd been paying for it. Tuesday morning, over coffee, I listened to my voicemails the way I review a client's shoebox of receipts, chronologically, without flinching, pencil in hand. Dean, 11:21, shouting over lake wind. What did you do? Gary walked. You sabotaged me. Call me back right now. No question about whether it was true. Straight to the wound. Brooke, 1:15, in her bank voice, the one she uses to deny loans gently. Faith. There's been a misunderstanding, and I think if we all just talk like adults. And then a pause, and lower, off script. Mom says there are records? Just call me. Aunt Patty, 3 o'clock, syrup over gravel. Honey, whatever this is about, family works it out. Also, is it true about the taxes? Call Aunt Patty. And then my mother. 3 voicemails spread across the day like the stages of a fever. The first, brisk and managerial. Faith Ann Terrell, call me this minute. This is a family matter. The second, at dusk, quieter, the wind gone. You paid the septic? Faith, the roof? Why didn't you? And then a long breath, and the click. And the third, at 11:58 p.m., barely above a whisper. The voice of a woman sitting alone on a dark porch, while everyone else pretends to sleep. Please come home. We didn't know. I set my pencil down. I looked out my window at the parking lot of my ordinary, self-made little life, and I said to my empty kitchen the only reply that voicemail deserved. You knew enough to whisper. 63 calls in one day, from a family that couldn't dial my number once all summer to say pack a bag. If someone in your life only calls when the lights go out, tell me about it in the comments. I read them all. And stay with me. Because what I said at that living room meeting 2 nights later is the part my family will never forget. They came home Tuesday, a day late, because you can't check out of a lake cottage angry any faster than you can happy. Dean didn't bother calling first. At 12:40 he shouldered through the door of my office on Main Street, sunburned and thunderous, past Marcy at the front desk, and stood over me smelling like lake water and betrayal. You knew, he said. You sat down here and let us drive into a wall. I finished the entry I was typing, saved the file, and folded my hands. You planned for 4 months, I said. I sent one email. He went off like a shaken can. I'd embarrassed him in front of the franchise people. I'd always thought I was better than everyone. This is why nobody wanted me there. That last one hung in the air between us, and he had the decency to look away from it. Then he said the sentence he'd actually come to say, the one the whole cottage had no doubt agreed on. Family money is family money, Faith. I looked at my brother, 29 years old, strong as a barn door, not a bad man, just a man who'd been served his whole life and thought it was weather. Family money is family money, I repeated. Then it's strange none of the family paid any. His jaw worked. He wanted to hit something, and there was nothing in my tidy office soft enough, so he kicked my wastebasket into the wall on his way out. Paper everywhere, very fierce. And left. Marcy leaned in with wide eyes and asked if I was okay. I was picking up crumpled paper off my floor, and I realized I was, mostly. But the visit that actually got under my skin came that evening. Brooke. And Brooke brought something I didn't have. A piece of the truth. Brooke knocked on my apartment door at 7, holding a grocery store lasagna like a white flag, mascara ghosted under her eyes. I let her in because I wanted answers more than I wanted distance, and my sister has never been able to hold a secret with witnesses present. She started with the caption. It was a stupid joke, she said, staring at my counter. You were being... I thought you'd chosen work over us again. I was mad at you. It was ugly, and I'm sorry. Chosen work over us? I asked carefully what exactly she meant, and watched my sister's face do something complicated. Mom told us in June, Brooke said. She said she'd invited you first, before any of us. She said you told her Labor Day was your busiest client stretch, quarterly something, and that we should go without you. You insisted. And we shouldn't bring it up because you felt guilty about it. The kitchen got very quiet. She stood in my driveway, Faith. She said, don't pester your sister about the trip, she'll just feel worse. So there it was, the missing column. To me, Mom had said, don't make any plans. Stay in town, just wait. To them, Mom had said, Faith turned us down. Don't mention it to her. 2 stories, airtight, pointed away from each other like curtains over the same window, and one director standing between them, keeping both halves of her family from ever comparing notes. Even the cruelty of that caption had been farmed. Brooke had aimed it at a sister she believed had snubbed the family. I'm not excusing her. LOL is LOL. But as she stood in my kitchen crying into her own casserole, I finally saw the full blueprint. My mother hadn't just hidden a trip from me. She'd hidden me from my family. Wednesday, the summonses started. Mom wanted me at the house, to straighten this out as a family. At her table, on her clock, with her pot roast as anesthesia. Aunt Patty offered to mediate, which is Patty for sitting close enough to hear everything. I declined all of it, politely, the way I decline clients who want creative accounting. Then I sent my first message to my family since Friday. One text to the regular group chat, the public one, the one with no boat emoji. Wednesday, 7 p.m., Mom's living room, everyone, I'll bring the paperwork. That was the whole message. I watched 3 sets of typing dots rise and fall like people bobbing underwater, and after 6 minutes, the only reply was from Dean. Okay. Power isn't loud, it turns out. Power is being the one who names the time and brings the documents. Sound familiar, Mom? I spent that afternoon at my office copier like a priest preparing communion. 5 sets, collated, clipped. Every receipt, every statement, every canceled check. 6 years of the green binder reproduced in black and white. Marcy asked if I was okay for the second time in 2 days. Never better, I said, and meant it, which worried me more than the alternative. I stopped at Ruth's on my way home. She was watching her shows, and she muted the television, which is how you know a conversation matters. I asked her to come. I'll sit in the armchair, she said. You'll stand. Then she looked at me over her glasses with those third-grade teacher eyes that have watched 40 years of children decide who to be. Go get your inheritance, honey, not the cottage. The other thing. I didn't fully understand her until it was over. I wasn't going there to win. I'd already won Monday at 11:04. I was going there to decide what winning would cost. I got to my mother's house at 7 exactly, because punctuality is a language and I wanted mine formal. The living room was staged, of course. My mother has never once hosted an ambush without refreshments. Lemon bars on the good plate, coffee in the carafe, lamps turned to their forgiving settings. Dad looked down at us from the mantel, holding a walleye and a smile from 20 summers ago. Dean stood by the window with his arms crossed, jaw set, deadline 2 days away, and dying. Brooke and Josh shared the love seat like people at a deposition. Aunt Patty had been disinvited. I'd made that a condition, and her absence had its own weight, like a muted trumpet. Ruth took the armchair by the lamp, hands folded on her cane, magnificent. And my mother sat on the edge of the sofa in her church cardigan, hair done, face composed, a woman prepared to manage her way through one more family weather event. Ava was supposed to be upstairs. I saw her anyway, through the balusters at the top of the staircase, chin on her knees. And I did not tell on her, because some educations you don't interrupt. Faith, my mother began, in the voice she uses to return soup at restaurants. Before anything else, I want you to know how much we... I raised one hand, gently, and the sentence died of natural causes. I crossed the carpet I'd learned to crawl on, and I set the green binder down on the coffee table between the lemon bars and the coasters, square to the table's edge, the way I'd rehearsed without admitting I was rehearsing. The room looked at it the way you'd look at a strange dog. My name is on the deed, I said. But that's not the part you don't know yet. My mother said my name the way you'd handle glass. I opened the binder. I stayed standing, and I turned pages, and I did what I do better than anyone in that room. I read the record into evidence. Property taxes, Lake Arden Cottage, $3,900 a year. Here's 6 years of county receipts. Note the name on everyone. I laid the page flat and turned it toward them. Homeowners insurance, $1,650 a year, auto-paid from Terrell Bookkeeping. That's my business, which means that's my name again. Paid. September, 4 years ago. The septic failure. You all remember the smell? You joked about it at Thanksgiving. $7,200. Here's the contractor's invoice, and here's who signed it at 6 in the morning. Page. The roof. After the ice storm. $4,800. The dock you cannonballed off Saturday, Dean. I rebuilt the pilings under your feet 2 summers ago. $2,300. The furnace. $3,100. Plowing. Winterizing. The chimney. The plumber. Page. 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 Nobody touched a lemon bar. Josh was the first to stop meeting my eyes, and Josh had the least to be ashamed of, which tells you something about shame and how it books itself to the wrong accounts. I turned to the last sheet, the one with 6 years of pencil arithmetic in the margin, and I said the number out loud in that living room for the first time anywhere. $61,400. Then I set a clipped photocopy of the entire binder in front of each of them, Mom, Dean, Brooke, and Josh, and one for the armchair, because Ruth had earned a program. Mom was right about one thing, I said, and I looked at her, and my voice stayed level, and hers was nowhere to be found. I do the math out loud. The clock over the kitchen doorway ticked. Somewhere upstairs a stair creaked and went still. My mother rose off the sofa cushion and I braced for the denial, the reframe, the managed weather I'd been forecast my whole life. That is not what came out of her. What came out of my mother was the truth. And it came out the way water comes through a failed foundation, first a seam, then all at once. She sat back down mid-rise, as if her knees had voted against the performance, and she looked at the photocopy in her lap, and she said, "I couldn't cover it." The room went so quiet I could hear the carafe cooling. "After your father died, the pension was half what I refinanced, and then the card, and then the home equity loan." Her hands smoothed the pages without reading them. "Every month I'd sit at that kitchen table with your little spreadsheet and move numbers around like furniture, and there was never—" She stopped. Started again. "Your father handled it. Then he didn't, and everyone assumed I was fine, and I let them, because—" She looked up, and for one unguarded second I saw underneath the stage director to the scared bookkeeping of her own life. "Because I could not sit at Thanksgiving and be the poor widow, Faith. I could not." Dean said, "Mom, you don't have to." And she kept going, over him, at me. "The bills started coming and your name was already on things and it was so easy. You never asked for credit. You never even told them." A small, terrible laugh. "You made it so easy." And then my mother folded her hands on her lap and delivered, in the voice of a woman reciting something she'd learned before she learned to question it. "Nobody ever asked me either, you know. All those years with your grandma, Dorsey, nobody asked. I thought that's what daughters were for." In the armchair, Ruth closed her eyes like someone hearing a diagnosis she'd predicted, and I stood there holding 6 years of paper, understanding my mother completely, and finally, the river, the drowning, all of it. And I said, quietly, "That's the saddest sentence you've ever said, Mom. And it's still not an apology." Brooke pulled in a breath, and then came the offer. They pivoted the way families do. No signal, all at once, like starlings. Denial hadn't survived the binder, so they reached for the checkbook. Brooke leaned forward, bank voice engaged, hands sketching reasonableness in the air. "Okay, here's what makes sense. The cottage sells. It's a seller's market. Gary says 310, maybe 320. The first 61.4 comes off the top and goes straight to you. Every cent back, Faith, before anyone else sees a dime. That's fair. Nobody's asking you to lose anything." Dean came off the window like a man given one more rep. 60 for the deposit holds my territory till Friday. Faith. Friday. This franchise runs 8% margins in towns half this size. I'll have Mom paid back in 3 years. You in 2. It's not spending. It's seeding. Dad would get that. Dad built things. He was pacing now, pitching to the room, to the mantel, to the walleye. And then, my mother did the thing I'd been braced for since Monday, the thing she does best in all the world. She crossed the carpet, sat beside me on the arm of the sofa, and took my hand in both of hers, warm and dry and certain, and she made her offer. Not money. The other currency. "Sign it, sweetheart. Just this once. And everything changes, I promise you. You'd run it all. The money, the decisions, everything through you. Out in the open, the way it should have been. Every trip, every holiday. You're the first call I make. First, Faith. Not the note on the counter. Never again." She squeezed my hand. "You'd be the head of this family. You practically already are. All you have to do is sign." And there it was, gift-wrapped and glowing. Everything I had wanted since I was 28 years old offered at last, sincerely, in front of witnesses. Every price tag in that room was face up now, including mine. They were offering me the family I'd been paying for all along. All I had to do was keep paying. I looked down at my mother's hands wrapped around mine, and I understood, at last and all the way, what I was being offered. A promotion. Head of family. Chief of staff to my own life. Senior vice president of other people's emergencies. with a corner office in the house where they whisper when I walk in. 10 days ago, I would have signed. That's the part that scares me still. How close 10 days is. I slid my hand out from between my mother's, gently, the way you take your hand back from a sleeping child, and I stood up straight, and I kept my voice at the exact register I use to tell a client their business is insolvent. Low, kind, and immovable. The cottage is not for sale, I said. Not this fall, not to fund a deposit, not to keep anyone from looking poor at Thanksgiving. Dad put 2 names on that deed, and both of them are staying on it. It stays open to this whole family. Ava learns to dive off that dock next summer. That doesn't change. What changes is this. I picked up the binder and closed it. The invisible payments end on the 30th. Taxes, insurance, repairs. From now on, the cottage runs on a written agreement. Everyone's share on paper, mine included. I'll draft it for free. It's the last free thing I'm doing. I turned to Dean. The answer on the 60,000 is no, not out of spite. A dream you can't fund without selling your father's dock isn't a dream yet. It's a bill. When you've got a real plan, I'll go over every number with you. At my desk. In daylight. And then to my mother, because she was still looking up at me from the arm of the sofa with the deal dying in her eyes. I don't want to run this family, Mom. I never did. I wanted to be in it. There's a difference. And it took me $61,000 to learn it. I'll teach anyone in this room the binder. I'll carry no one. I'm your daughter. I was never your staff. Behind me, Dean kicked the leg of the coffee table so hard the carafe jumped. Then it's gone, Dean said, too loud for the room. The territory, the franchise. Friday it's gone, and that's on you. He pointed at me the way you point at a car wreck. You know what you are? You're the reason this family is over. Dad's probably... And he stopped himself there, at the edge of the one sentence none of us ever finish, and grabbed his jacket instead. The door didn't slam so much as detonate. The pictures on the wall did a little shiver, and the deadline died right there in the echo. And my mother? This is the bill. This is what it cost. Write it down. My mother looked at the door, and looked at me, and went after neither of us. She sat on the arm of the sofa with her hands in her lap, and chose silence. One more time, the way she'd chosen it all summer. That was my payment in full, and I felt it clear the account. Brooke stood, collected Josh with a glance, and said, I'll call you, in a voice that meant someday, maybe, thinner. Then, small feet on the stairs. Ava, in her sleep shirt, passed her mother's outstretched hand, straight across the carpet to me, arms around my ribs, fierce as a seatbelt. She tipped her chin up and whispered, Great-Grandma Ruth said you'd stand up. She told me to watch. I looked over her head at Ruth, who was examining the ceiling with the innocence of a career educator. I hugged my niece, said goodnight to the room in general, and walked out the front door of the house I grew up in, lighter and poorer than I had ever been in my life, both at once, having just traded the family I'd been buying for the person I'd been burying. The September night smelled like cut grass and rain coming. Grief and relief can ride in the same breath. I know, because I drove home on one. I'd love to tell you the phone rang the next morning full of apologies. It didn't work that way, because it never does. Dean went silent. No calls, no Sunday dinners. A mutual friend reported he'd picked up extra shifts and told people his sister chose a shack over her own brother. The franchise territory went to a man in Dayton. Brooke texted on holidays, polite as a greeting card, and once, in November, sent 3 photos of Ava's science fair with no caption, which from Brooke is practically a sonnet. Aunt Patty changed sides 4 times, depending on her audience. The town talked, then found newer weather. And then, on a gray Tuesday in October, the bell over my office door rang, and my mother walked in. No lasagna, no speech, holding a plastic grocery bag full of unopened envelopes, and stood at the counter like a first-time client and said, Teach me the binder. So I did. We started with how to read a tax bill. She cried once, quietly, over the home equity statement, and I handed her the tissues and a highlighter in that order because love in my family was finally learning to speak accounting. She took a part-time job at the fabric store on the square. Her choice, not mine. And in December, she put a check for $200 on my counter, the first of a payment plan she invented herself. Against 61,000, it was a raindrop in a quarry, and we both knew it. And I deposited it anyway, because the point of that check was never the amount. Ava started coming by on Fridays after school to learn what she calls allowance math. Small true things. It turns out that's what's left when the performance closes. And small true things, unlike pot roast and promises, compound. This Labor Day, 1 year, almost to the hour, after I woke up to that silent house. I woke up at the cottage on Lake Arden. First one up, coffee in my father's old mug, bare feet on the dock he paid for, and I kept standing. The lake did its early morning trick where it holds the sky still for you. Ruth was on the porch by 8, wrapped in a quilt, supervising the horizon. Ava spent the morning practicing her dive off the end of the dock, badly and magnificently, while Brooke, who came up Saturday, awkward and trying, which counts, filmed every attempt and posted none of them. My mother arrived at noon, invited, with potato salad and without commentary, and sat in a lawn chair like a guest, because that's what she was, and guests, it turns out, can be delightful. There's a cost-sharing agreement in a drawer in the kitchen with 4 signatures on it. Nobody whispers here anymore. The whole architecture of whisper has been condemned. Dean didn't come. His name is in the agreement anyway. His share marked paid by owner Faith for 1 more year because the door isn't locked to my brother. It just has visiting hours now, like every honest door. Late in the afternoon, Ruth watched me flip burgers in the rain-spitting breeze, under the awning, the way my father used to, and she smiled at something far away. They told me once, don't make any plans. I made plans. If you keep one line from my story, keep this one. Being needed is not the same as being loved. And the day a woman finally learns the difference is the day she stops being furniture in other people's houses and starts being the author of her own. That's my story. 1 note on a counter, 1 green binder, 63 missed calls, and 1 plan I finally made for myself. If this reminded you of a ledger you've been keeping quietly for people who never once asked what it costs you, take that as your sign. Bring it into the daylight, kindly and completely, and let the people who love you prove it with more than a guest list. If you know a woman who needs to hear this today, share this video with her. Drop a comment and tell me what you would have done at that living room